What is going on, everyone? My name is Roberto Diaz, and today we're going to be talking about your church videos and how you can improve them. Some people might say your videos suck. Maybe you know your videos suck. So today we're going to be talking about a few ways to improve your videos right now. If you're doing live events, if you're doing highlight videos, any type of church content, interviews, these tips should help you become a better videographer. And if you want that little boost of confidence, little things to make you better right now, watch this video. Right off the bat, let's talk about some serious stuff. Don't be discouraged on what you're seeing online. When you're online looking at content, you're gonna see a lot of people with expensive gear, but you have to remember, this is what they do for a living. A lot of people are starting off in video and you don't have the money or the resources to buy all this expensive gear. Use what you have right now. I try to say this in the beginning of a lot of my videos. Don't let the gear bring you down. It's not about the gear, it's about how you use it. For the longest time, I started with the cheapest, wackest, and worst gear you can think about ever being made. It didn't matter that it was cheap or low budget. I pushed that gear till it couldn't even work anymore. Whatever you're starting off with, make sure let's push it. To get right to the point, we're gonna be talking about 3 tips to improve your church videos right now. Number 1, get rid of those shakes, those micro jitters. There's nothing more unprofessional or looks kind of indie than a lot of micro jitter shakes. And let me explain, why are you getting those shakes? And maybe you're at the point that you haven't even noticed these micro little vibrations in your videos. First, a lot of DSLR cameras now are tiny, compact, they're light, they're still tiny that you're gonna get a lot of shake. Any movement you try to do, it's gonna be projected as some crazy shake because they're so connected to you, they're so tiny, they're gonna come off like a huge shake. And I'm not talking about, regular movement. A lot of people still go for that cinematic look, which is handheld, but I'm talking about that tiny little micro jitters and shakes. Those don't look good. And those are the first thing when I see a video, I'm like, Lord Jesus, please find a way to take that away. Why is my laptop's fan blowing? Going off the hook. We don't need a screen here. Just forget that. Anyways, so those shakes are the first thing when I see them in a video. We need to get rid of them. And you're like, Roberto, how do I remove them from my video? What do I have to do? There's a few different ways that you can remove shakes. And the number 1, get a monopod. You don't need to get a huge tripod. Start off with a monopod. It's literally a stick just to give you that extra little support to hold up your camera. You don't need to spend hundreds of dollars on an expensive monopod. They're on Amazon. I can link them down below so you guys don't have to do any searching. A monopod is such a great way to get stable footage. Another thing you're gonna wanna do, if you don't already, get lenses with image stabilization. They will make a huge difference, especially if you don't have a camera, which goes on to our next point, get a camera with in-body stabilization. If you can't get a camera with in-body stabilization, at least make sure to get a lens with image stabilization. It will make a complete difference when you're walking around with a lens. And remember, this is not meant to replace the gimbal. This is literally just to take off those tiny little movements on your camera to make your footage seem more professional. Another thing that you could do is add some type of stabilization. If you're a Premiere Pro user, you can use warp stabilizer, which is great. If you're in Final Cut, you're gonna have to use a stabilization that comes with Final Cut. It gets by. It works sometimes. It does a little bit of something, but it's better than nothing. So I say if you have those tiny little micro jitters, add some stabilizer on it. Try to see yourself the difference, what it could do. Something to note, you're gonna have to be a little bit careful when you add stabilization on your footage and post. You're gonna have to crop in a little tiny bit because it's gonna move the footage around to compensate for your shakes. So it's basically moving it around where you're shaking to fix the shakes. That's the only thing. You're gonna lose a little bit of resolution, but I honestly don't mind losing a little bit of resolution rather than having this complete earthquake footage. The last solution, and be aware to fix those shakes, is get a gimbal. I recommend the gimbal last because it's probably the biggest waste of money for me. There's a point where you're gonna stop using it, or I don't know what it is, but every person that I know that bought a gimbal ends up regretting it and never ends up using it. I don't know what it is. It works great. It's beautiful for music videos. It's amazing. It's stabilized. It's great. It ends up becoming a hassle to balance, to set up, to charge, to then start using it, and then it ends up hurting your back or your body more because it's more weight that you have to deal with. As long as you're cool with all that, I mean, you're gonna say yes at first and you're probably gonna buy one if you're just starting off. But then with time, I'm like, I don't need it. And that's, if you check right now on OfferUp or on Facebook Marketplace, there's a bunch of gimbals. So if you want to maybe buy one for cheap, go ahead, check them out, take advantage of that situation. But yeah, you don't need a gimbal for stable footage like that. Unless you're really planning it, I'd say you don't need a gimbal. That's another solution if you want to get rid of your micro shaky footage. I'm not saying shake is bad because I shoot a lot of stuff handheld. I'm just saying work on it to the point where it doesn't look unprofessional and too shaky. There's a difference from that cinematic handheld look from that shaky, like you look like you just had caffeine look. So as long as you know that, you should be good. Let's move on to the next point. Another thing you're gonna have to be aware of is that ISO. If you see that ISO on your camera, be aware of what you're doing. If you're cranking that thing, you're gonna get noise in your footage. If you notice that your footage is getting a lot of grain, a lot of noise, a lot of dots, if you don't know what those things are, if you zoom in and you see all those little dots, that's noise. And that's happening because you are raising up your ISO too much. You're literally just adding digital gain to your footage and you're not actually compensating for there not being enough light. One of my tips for you guys is actually shoot a little bit darker in places that it's dark. And at first it didn't make sense to me. Why do I shoot darker? Why do I shoot a little bit underexposed in places where it's kind of dark? And the reason is because it is dark. Don't try to make it look bright if it's not bright. You're trying to add something that's not there. If there's a black wall and it looks black in the church or in the building, wherever you're at, it's black. Don't try to raise it up to the point where you start seeing detail, because what's going to happen, all you're going to see is noise. There's no information there. That you can't bring up that color. You can't bring up that detail there. There's nothing there. A good rule and something you can do to be careful when you're exposing for people on stages is try to expose for the person talking, preaching, musicians, expose their faces. And that's probably the best way. If the place and an environment you are in is so dark that even if you try to expose for them, you start seeing a lot of noise, underexpose maybe half a stop or one stop. And then when you're editing in post-production, you can add a little bit of boost there. I'd rather have my footage a little bit underexposed than having so much noise where to the point it doesn't make sense. Let's say you already screwed up. You have this footage, it's noisy, it looks horrible. What can you do? One tip that you could do is lower the darks. So shadows, you can bring them down a little bit, and technically if there's noise there, you can make that noise black. You're bringing them down enough to the point that those shadows that have the noise, now they're dark enough to not even be seen. So that's a little trick. Last resort, let's say you have noise in the actual person's face and you did whatever you could and this is all you have. That's the footage you got and you can't do anything else with it. There's a few different plugins that you could use called denoisers. There's one that comes in Final Cut Pro and I know there's one that also comes in Premiere. I recommend staying away from those. They don't work the way they should, in my opinion. There's a few different plugins to denoise your video. They basically scan your footage and they remove the noise. They're not perfect, they're not gonna make it crispy clean, but they're a lot better than having noisy footage. So rather than just uploading that grainy, noisy footage, you can add a denoiser on top. A quick little tip, if you work with makeup or if you work with people that want to soften up the face and you don't have a plugin to do that, you can actually use a denoiser on the face and that makes skin tones look a lot softer. So if you're doing some type of beauty, if you have women and they don't like the way their face looks or you want to help them out a bit, use the denoiser on their face and it smooths it out a lot. Just be careful, don't push anything to any extreme, just be subtle and you should be fine. And the last point that we're going to be talking about today is LUTs. I know the first thing that you're probably doing right now is searching for a big bunch load of LUT packs and LUTs because you see these people shooting amazing footage using LUTs. If you don't know what a LUT is, it's basically a filter, like an Instagram filter or VSCO filter. It manipulates the color to look way different from what you started. And this is great. I'm not going to sit here and say I don't use LUTs because I do. I'm selling my LUT in the description below if you want to purchase my LUT. But the point is to be careful when using these LUTs because when people are starting off, I don't know why, the first thing they do is raise up the LUT intensity or opacity to 100%. You have to be careful. My recommendation is keep it to 20 to 40%. At first, you're going to want to add more because it's going to seem more worth it, like you're getting more of that punch, that color, but a lot of times it ends up being too much. And also, before you even add a LUT, your footage needs to actually be color corrected before you can actually have a LUT on top of it. So you need to get proper exposure, you need to make sure the white balance is perfect, and then After all that, then you can add a LUT on top of it. So it's something with time you have to kind of train your eyes to start seeing like, oh, that doesn't look good. Oh, this looks good. And obviously we're all here to play. We're all here to play with colors and experiment and do different things. But just remember, like, be careful, don't push it too much. And this is just my opinion, but just be careful on the intensity that you use on LUTs. Hopefully these tips are helpful to you guys. Once again, my name is Roberto Diaz. If you could please hit that subscribe button, it would be very, very helpful. If you guys have any questions, please let me know down below and I'll make sure to answer it like that. Thank you guys for watching this video. Peace.